Hello and welcome. You found the Social Work Podcast. My name's Jonathan Singer, and I'll be your host as we explore all things social work. Hey there, podcast listeners. Jonathan here. You're pretty good at your job, right? I mean, if your job's being a student, I suspect you're getting mostly A's and B's. And if you're a practitioner, out in the field, then the fact that you're listening to this episode purely for your own edification suggests that you are one dedicated social worker. That, or you're going to listen to just about anything you can now that the first season of the Serial Podcast is over. I know, I'm right there with you. But I digress. When it comes to your performance, unless I'm your field instructor, your boss, or your professor, I don't actually know how well you're doing. If I were in the room with you, like actually live in the room with you, not just in your ear, I could ask you, how good are you? If you've had to fill out your own field evaluation or annual employee self-evaluation, you've thought about how you would rate yourself. Well, the problem with rating ourselves is that we don't do a very good job at it. We think we're doing better at everyday tasks than we actually are, and we think we're doing worse on difficult or unusual tasks than we actually are. A classic 1981 study by Ola Svensson found that 93% of American drivers rated themselves as above average. I know. You're thinking that Svensson must have studied drivers in Garrison Keillor's fictional Wisconsin town of Lake Wobegon, where, quote, all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. So, if your self-evaluation isn't particularly valid, and that's not to be confused with reliable, right? It might be reliably over or underestimated, but still not be a valid assessment. Who could provide an objective evaluation of your skills? In social work education, the assumption is that your professors and field instructors, or practice teachers as they're called in England, are the best people to ask. But what if they're not? Professors have been criticized for contributing to grade inflation, the so-called Lake Wobegon effect, where all student grades are above average. Consider this. In 1940, the most common grade received by students at a university was a C. 35% of students received C's, compared with 15% who received A's. In 2008, the most common grade was an A, with 42% of students receiving an A and only 15% receiving a C. Now, this isn't an indictment of social work faculty. This study was based on undergraduate grades across all programs. And I've heard social work faculty argue that it is, in fact, unethical to pass students who can't do work at an A level. It might be that in social work, faculty are working really hard to make sure those C students become A students. But maybe not. What about field instructors? The news isn't so good here either. According to a study by Marion, Bogo, and colleagues, quote, field instructors had extremely high agreement when evaluating performance of students they did not know, end quote. But these same field instructors had great difficulty evaluating their own students, in part because of the relationships they had with these students. For example, if I'm your field instructor and I really like you, or I really dislike you, it's going to be harder for me to objectively evaluate your skills. The tendency to, quote-unquote, go easier on likable students is what researchers call a leniency bias. And for a profession that considers field education a signature pedagogy, valid and reliable evaluations of student performance in field is paramount. And that brings me to today's topic, objective standardized structured exams, also known as OSCE. For over 100 years, educators have struggled with the best way to provide social workers with the knowledge and skills needed to provide the best services possible to clients. The division in most schools is that knowledge is provided in the classroom and specific practice skills are gained in the field. But starting in 2008, the Council on Social Work Education, the national body that accredits schools of social work in the United States, required programs to evaluate a student's competence in 10 areas. And competency-based outcomes emphasize what a student can do, not just what they know. So if evaluations by students, professors, and field instructors fall short in the ways that I've just mentioned, what can we do? Well, today's episode is an effort to provide one answer to that question. I look at OSCE, which stands for the Objective Structured Clinical Examination. This is an approach that's intended to provide a more structured and objective evaluation of social work skills. And my guests, Marion Bogo and Mary Rawlings, along with their co-authors Katz and Carmen Logie, are pioneers in the development, implementation, and evaluation of OSCE adapted for social work. Marion Bogo is professor at the Factor Inwintosh Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto. She's published over 100 journal articles and book chapters, as well as 5 books. In 2013, she was awarded the Significant Lifetime Achievement in Social Work Education Award from the Council on Social Work Education in recognition for her contributions to social work education and to improving assessment of professional competence. In 2014, she was appointed as an Officer of the Order of Canada for her achievements in the field of social work as a scholar and a teacher, and for advancing the practice in Canada and abroad. Mary Rawlings is a professor at Azusa Pacific University, chair of the Department of Social Work, and currently serves as the director of the MSW program. Her current research focuses on the development of OSCE exams for social work. She's a licensed clinical social worker with more than 10 years of practice experience. In their 2014 CSWE press text, Using Simulation in Assessment and Teaching, OSCE Adapted for Social Work, reviews how to conceptualize competence and what are the implications for assessment, how to design, prepare, and implement an OSCE, how to develop practice competence through teaching with simulation, and finally, how to engage university partners in delivering OSCE Adapted for Social Work. And for social work instructors who are interested in learning how to implement OSCE, the text has over 50 pages of appendices with practical resources. And Marion and her colleagues have been providing faculty development institutes at CSWE's annual program meeting for the past several years, and will conduct annual roundtable discussions at APM moving forward. Now, I spoke with Marion and Mary in October 2014 at CSWE's 60th annual program meeting in Tampa, Florida. Unlike most guests, whom I schedule months in advance, Marion and Mary responded to a last-minute invitation. We came up with the questions on the spot, and then something unusual happened. They just sort of answered the questions without me prompting them, which in retrospect wasn't surprising when I realized that they had spent much of the previous 4 days talking at length about OSCE, not to mention the previous 10 years. In this episode, you'll hear a lot of Marion and Mary, and not a lot of me. And now, without further ado, on to episode 94 of the Social Work Podcast, Objective Structured Clinical Examination, OSCE Adapted for Social Work, an interview with Marion Bogo and Mary Rawlings. Marion and Mary, thank you so much for being here on the Social Work Podcast and talking with us today about OSCE. So how did you come up with OSCE?
I'd been involved in a long program of research where we were trying to develop a field evaluation instrument that would be more reliable and more valid. Because the difficulty has been that field evaluations have tended to be extremely inflated in their assessment of student competence. After experimenting with many different tools, while we achieved a somewhat of a success in producing more variability, we recognized that there was a leniency bias on the part of field instructors due to the intense dyadic relationship with the student. And so we began to look for different, more robust methods of evaluating student learning, and worked with colleagues in health professions education to examine the OSCE and then ultimately to adapt it for social work.
I came at it from a very different perspective. I was an undergraduate program chair, and in an undergraduate liberal arts environment, we're often selling social work as a professional program where you're going to learn skills. And I was wondering to myself, are we really teaching students skills in our programs as compared to sociology or psychology? And so I was in my PhD studies, and so really wanted to study student acquisition of skills. And so compared student skill development using a live actress as compared to student self-perception of their skills. One, I found student self-perception of their abilities was very poor. You had high-performing students that thought they were rotten, who actually were quite good, and then you would hear students who really weren't that good think that they just nailed it with the actress. And so I was experimenting with using actresses, and at that point in time, my dissertation chair, Dr. Wally Gingrich, had a colleague, Marion, and she had invited us, and we had met at a conference to see OSCEs done in psychiatry. And I was really amazed with both the acting as well as their high expectations of students. So we watched these OSCEs where actors and actresses played persons with bipolar disorder, depression, and I thought they did a better job than what I often see on television. So I thought, wow, we really can replicate the complex things that social workers do, where I think we've heard sometimes that, what social work does is so complex we can't really wrap our arms around an assessment measure of that. And so it challenged me to want to go farther and really having students demonstrate skills to us. And the other thing that it challenged me in was that we were kind of babying our students. We didn't want to raise their anxiety. It'd be too much for us to evaluate them directly. And I just realized we have to raise the bar. We have to observe our students in what they are doing and to really push their skill development and to get them ready. So then we started working together to really go, how can we translate an OSCE then for social work? Because that's the method that's been in medical fields for quite some time, to have students really demonstrate their ability. And so that's how we got started looking at a OSCE for social work.
We began with a conception of what professional competence in social work would look like. And our conceptual map is in the first chapter of our book. But what we were aiming at capturing was what we've called holistic competence. And that is that we're looking at what students actually do in practice, but also how they think and how they're feeling as they're interacting in an interview. And when we say how they think, we're especially interested in how they use the knowledge and value base of social work to understand what's transpiring in the interview and then to guide what they do next. We've also become very interested in the way in which students manage their own personal self in the interview, the assumptions they bring, their level of emotional arousal, what we have traditionally in social work called use of self. But we've further developed these concepts. So with this model of competence, we set out to adapt the OSCE to include a performance dimension in an interview and a reflective component.
So it sounds like the OSCE really has its origin in, Marion, what you were talking about as an interest to be more rigorous in assessing the skills that students were supposed to be learning in field, and that, Mary, this really came around for you around your dissertation work, and that you want to sort of up the ante with students and challenge them to raise the bar, much like you'd seen in the psychiatry OSCE, and that you guys came together and started to develop an OSCE specifically for social work. So what does an OSCE look like?
So what an OSCE looks like is that we have an actor or actress trained to play the role of a client, where we very carefully delineated the case that's going to be presented to the student. In developing that case, it's really important that it's standard, so that every student gets an equal chance to demonstrate their skills. And so how we've done that is we've embedded what we call verbatim statements, where every time the exam is administered, the actress will weave in those statements so that every student has an opportunity to catch the prompt to demonstrate the skill that we're trying to measure. So how it works is the actress will be in the room, the evaluator is in the room with the assessment instrument, and the student enters into the room, into the scenario. The student begins the interview based on instructions that we have given them prior, whether it's right before or the day before. And the student enters the room and has 10 minutes to start, to demonstrate the skill. Then a bell will ring to clue the student they have 5 minutes left. At the end of that 5-minute time, the bell rings again, and the interview is over, and the actress leaves the room. And the evaluator will complete their assessment of the student.
What is especially unique about what we call the OSCE Adapted for Social Work is the next piece. Immediately after the interview, there is a reflective component. Now, this reflective component can be done verbally, with the rater asking particular systematic questions to the student, or the students can go to a computer lab where the questions have already been loaded onto the computers, and the students would then respond to these questions. Now, what these questions have systematically been designed to do is to tap into the student's understanding of the client in the scenario, the way in which students have used social work knowledge and values to understand and to then intervene, and how students personally reacted and managed those reactions in the interview. There are also some questions about the students' perception of how they did in the interview. So these, again, are very systematic, reflective questions based on the competency framework. The students' reflections are then rated by the same rater who observed the interview. So what we have here is the immediacy of both the student reflecting on their interview and the immediacy of the rater being able to rate those reflections in relation to the actual interview that was conducted. What's been very interesting in our research is seeing that there are some students who, in their reflections, comment that they did certain things in the interview, which in fact they did not do. It's not that our students are trying to misrepresent themselves. It's rather that this data supports the cognitive science principle that it is in our human nature to distort. The reflection, as I said, is rated, and so together the performance rating and the reflection rating constitutes the educational assessment of students' competence.
I'd like to talk a little bit about sort of the student response, that how has this worked in the classroom? And I think there's lots of different ways we can apply an OSCE. At our university, we use it as the final exam in their Practice 1 courses. It carries a significant weight, for their final classroom grade. And so students, I have to tell you, are exceedingly anxious throughout the semester, knowing that this exam is coming and that they're going to be evaluated by a practitioner or other faculty member. But it also really motivates them. So we've been using role plays a long time. A lot of faculty use role plays. In my experience, students in their role plays with each other would giggle, they would laugh, they're trying, but they can't always fully wrap their heads around what you're trying to do. We have found them to be much more motivated, actually, and really using that time to practice for what they're going to be evaluated on later. And in the classroom, we really are teaching to the test. We know the skills we want them to be able to show us, and so it's really incumbent upon us to prepare them for that exam. And so we have found, in terms of student response, they've been much more motivated to practice the skills both in the classroom and outside the classroom to get ready for the exam. They also, while they are anxious, once they are done with the exam, they tell us, we need to do more of these. They're asking for more of them. I really believe students want to learn the skills for social work. They want to do a good job. And they found that it's such a realistic experience. They'll tell us, man, I didn't even realize she was an actress after a while, or that someone was in the room even evaluating me. Or they'll be surprised that the actress cried, and it really, makes the experience really realistic. And so they feel like they really get a chance to test out their skills. We do this prior to their going into the field setting, so they feel a little more prepared. And again, they're really asking for more of it in the classroom, and it's really motivated them to learn the skills we're asking of them.
Our program is a graduate program, and we've been using the OSCE similar to the way Mary has used it in undergraduate in a delayed entry field model. So in the first term, students are in the class learning the competencies, and then the OSCE is used before they go into the field. We were able to collect a lot of data, and we were able to get informed consent, and so we've been doing research on the OSCE. What's been amazingly interesting is that for the first time we have seen tremendous variability in the scores that students attain on the OSCE, both on the performance dimension and on the reflective dimension. And these results are discussed in our book and in numerous papers. What was especially informative was that by analyzing what students were doing and what they were reflecting on, we as a faculty were able to identify where our teaching needed to be strengthened. For example, many students in the graduate program, while they could understand social work knowledge, various concepts we were discussing, and they could write excellent academic papers about that, they were not able to see the links when they were actually in an interview with a simulated client. And so what it led us to do was to become much more integrated in our teaching and to very intentionally articulate the concept the way it looks in practice, looking at practice and extracting from that what concepts were evident in the practice. This has really informed and supported our teaching, and I think as a result, student learning. And subsequently, in future years, we began to see improvements in the students' ability to link theory and practice.
I just want to elaborate on that. We had an identical experience in our own program of the feedback loop back into the curriculum, that faculty, through observing a number of the student performances, we could see themes where our students were not doing well, and we realized we were not teaching them well. And we changed our curriculum, and similar to Marion's experience, our students improved in subsequent years as we were teaching them better.
We've been trying to make a stronger bridge between what we're learning in the OSCE and what students can be expected to come with when they start their field experience. And so we've been experimenting with various tools so that we could help students take a written report to the field instructors. We had to work with our university and legal counsel to ensure that students understood and agreed when they were admitted to the program that educational information such as this would be shared with field instructors. So this took a little bit of time, but it now has become institutionalized. And what we do is the instructor who examines the OSCE writes a report which the course instructor then converts into a summary with learning goals for the practicum. The student then takes that document to the field instructor, and they begin to use it in constructing the learning contractor learning plan. And the faculty field liaison who receives the contract, when they review the contract, they examine it to see that the lessons from the OSCE have been incorporated into the learning plan. We're hoping that this becomes another way to link classroom teaching with our signature pedagogy, field education.
We have not gotten that formal yet. But similarly, the results of the OSCE have informed field education. Our field instructor is now seeking the input from both the student and the practice instructor on how did the student do in the OSCE. Because what we have done some research at our university to look at, does their performance in the OSCE predict performance in field? We had a very small sample, so it was approaching significance. And anecdotally, what we found is that students who were doing poorly in field had done poorly also in the OSCE. There were students who, however, who did poorly in the OSCE who still were very successful in field, or at least in terms of their field evaluation, they were successful in field. Because of the anxiety, some students' anxiety overwhelms them and they sort of freeze in the OSCE. But we have such confidence in doing this now over the last 7 years at our university that we really feel like it allows us to identify students who might struggle and thus give them extra support, or think about a field placement and field supervisor situation that's going to better match the needs of that student. Because again, our goal is to help them be successful. We want them to be successful in field. We want them to learn the skills they need to be successful in field, and it's allowed us to sort of pre-identify students who might struggle so that we can give them additional support.
We've been talking a lot today about using OSCE at a foundation or generalist level. We now have a number of examples of projects in our faculty where teaching faculty have been using OSCE for specialized practice. So we have experimented with using it with a group of standardized clients, for example, portraying a family in an acute care hospital setting, how students can interact with the family and enact the concepts they've been learning in a family class. We're using it in a health specialization, and I could just go on and on elaborating all the other ways in which faculty members can adapt this kind of OSCE to their own specialized practice area.
So this has all sounded so exciting. I haven't even been able to interrupt you guys talking about it because I'm so engaged with this. But as I'm thinking about it, I'm wondering, how would I do this in my school?
I'm glad you asked that. We actually get that question a lot. We do our training, people get really excited, and then they go, how would I implement this? And I think the fun thing about the partnership that we've had, Marion and I, is that we come from very different universities. I come from a smaller liberal arts, faith-based university, smaller program. We're not a research one, limited resources, and have been able to implement this. And we've done that. There is some expense. The biggest expense has been hiring actors or actresses. I'm lucky. I live in Los Angeles. We have unemployed Starbucks working actresses, so I've been able to pay them fairly but reasonably. I've had a lot of faculty interest, and so faculty have donated their time to be the raters, because we've also found that faculty can't rate their own students, as well as, we've found field instructors might have a little leniency bias. We as faculty do that too. So faculty have volunteered to help us rate student performances. Field instructors are very excited about it, but it's been hard for them to leave their places of employment to offer to volunteer. So for us, the primary expense has been really around hiring actors or actresses. Bigger universities who have acting programs could partner with their acting programs. We have not done that because we're a smaller university and we didn't want students to run into their roommates in the process. So we've been really able to implement it on a very reasonable budget. I've gotten some small teaching grants through the university to develop the cases or the scenarios. And that's where a lot of the time comes in, is in that case development or instrument development. But that's really what we've given you in our book. We want to take that burden off of universities or small programs so that they can implement it. And there's a number of cases in there to really help people get started in this process. So I think it is doable. In some ways, it's almost easier in a small program because you're only getting a couple of people that you have to get on board with the project versus a whole curriculum committee or track committee. You're almost a little more flexible sometimes in a smaller program where you go, I got 20 students, I can do this with 20 students. And it's a faster rate of from, I think, idea conception to actually being able to implement it.
My program is at the University of Toronto, which is a research-intensive university with only a master's program and a doctoral program. We went about doing an OSCE through the good fortune of putting together a very strong academic team, and we were able to get a large national social sciences grant. The team consisted of myself and some of my faculty colleagues, but we were also fortunate to have on our team medical education researchers, mainly from psychology with strong psychometric backgrounds. We attracted a number of doctoral students who we were able to pay as research assistants, and we went through a very long process of piloting, refining instruments, testing the instruments, testing the case scenarios, so that, as Mary said, all of that material is in our book. We then had, again, the good fortune of having a very supportive dean who was encouraging but also gave us some resources, because we had proved the concept in 2 pilot studies, both of which have been published. We'd proved the concept working with about 30 participants. We now were encouraged to roll it out to 150 students, and we ran these students through OSCEs over 2 days. We had a multi-section course within which the OSCE was located, and recognizing the leniency bias, we had 8 instructors who we were able to scramble the students so that no instructor evaluated their own student. Some of the excellent byproducts have been that the doctoral students have been involved in numerous publications. And when they now have gone on the job market, their expertise in running OSCEs and using simulation has been value added in their job search. We were very enthusiastic about the effectiveness of the OSCE, and so our development office became interested, and we have been enormously successful in raising substantial private funds so that we now are going to be hiring a simulation educator to help us integrate simulation throughout the curriculum and the use of OSCE.
Marion mentions the opportunities for the doctoral students. I think there's also a variety of opportunities for how we use OSCEs. And we've talked about assessing student learning in the classroom. And that's been a primary use for us in the program. We've adapted it to also be able to use videotape, where students' performances are videotaped. I guess it's no longer videotaped, right? I think there's a new technological term for that. But they video recorded, where they take a DVD or a flash drive of their performance and are able to observe themselves. That's something we've been able to do because we have a great social sciences lab with excellent video equipment. And so how this gets implemented really varies based on your setting. And we want to encourage people to be creative and adaptive with how they use an OSCE. You don't need to have a simulation lab at your university in order to do this. I believe Marion does it in faculty offices throughout those 2 days where faculty offices are sort of taken over and used for the OSCE. We use our social sciences lab, but the videotaping has been very valuable for students to be able to see themselves. There's things they learn that no matter how you tell them, they won't know until they see it themselves. Another use that I think is important, especially as we're looking at the new 2015 EPAS, is its ability to assess programmatic outcomes in terms of competencies. We're given a little more flexibility if this new EPAS should get approved by the board in how we assess competence. And I get really excited thinking about how we can use these OSCEs to assess some of these aspects and get creative with assessing competence and then really using that for my program outcomes as well.
In our institutes and workshops, many of the people who have attended have talked about their collaborations on interprofessional education, especially in the health field. And we've heard some wonderful stories about health professions, especially medicine and nursing, who have the facilities. They have a bank of trained, standardized clients, and they are willing and interested in inviting and involving social work educators into their activities. So I think we would really encourage faculty members who are interested in using OSCE, if you have a medical school on your campus or you're near one, to think about interacting with them, because interprofessional education is just increasingly supported and valued, and it's a wonderful way of getting access to these facilities that could be too expensive for social work programs. Some of the new technology actually allows students to do the interview in one setting and then to have the interview recorded and streamed to anywhere, to faculty members can log in to some server where they can access the interview. And this is all secure and password protected. So this is another way that we can make use of resources that exist and that colleagues may be willing to share. Mary and I have been very fortunate to have each other to bounce off ideas. Mary's in California, I'm in Canada, but the telephone and Skype really works, and the meetings help us also to share ideas and problem solve. We are very committed to developing a community of simulation, education, researchers, and scholars in social work. There are communities like this in health professions education, but we want to have one in social work because we believe some of our needs are unique and that we have many excellent lessons to share with each other and with the larger simulation education community. So we will hold a roundtable every year at CSWE, and we really encourage faculty members who are listening to this podcast to attend our roundtable, to email us. We're setting up a listserv because we believe that the future for social work can be enhanced through the use of simulation and OSCE in achieving competence.
And the final thing is, as we have been starting to do these roundtables, we really are hearing some exciting things that faculty are starting to do with OSCE. I feel like it's starting to really gain that momentum. People are trying it, they're starting to do things. I want to challenge us in this next phase to really start writing about it and sharing it. The medical community publishes consistently the different OSCEs that they are delivering and testing their reliability and validity. And we need to really challenge ourselves to do the same thing and to get it into the literature, because we need valid and reliable instruments for assessment in social work. People are asking for it, we want them, and this is a great opportunity to begin to deliver some of those valid and reliable assessment measures.
Well, Marion and Mary, thank you so much for being here on the podcast and for talking about OSCE. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Jonathan Singer, and thanks for being with me today for another episode of the Social Work Podcast. If you missed an episode or have suggestions for future episodes, please visit socialworkpodcast.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our online store at cafepress.com/swpodcast. To all the social workers out there, keep up the good work. We'll see you next time at the Social Work Podcast.